Hey, this is Sam Black with my third match with this Red-Blue Legacy Cube draft deck. I am on the draw, and I have a pretty solid hand. Both of my colors of mana and castable spells represent a solid aggressive game plan, and opposition is really perfect with this as long as I can draw 2 more mana, one of which is blue. So I chose to play the Young Pyromancer rather than kill the Elvish Mystic. There's kind of this old always bolt the birds mantra that could have applied here. I could have incinerated the Elvish Mystic, but I felt like there were a few factors pulling me toward playing the Young Pyromancer instead. First, obviously, getting the Young Pyromancer down before using my burn spells gets me some extra value out of the Young Pyromancer. Second, I have an Electrolyze that I would much rather use on the Elvish Mystic than the Incinerate if I can draw another land. So I decided to give my opponent the 1 extra mana, and my opponent played Serac, and I failed to draw a land. So now I could bolt the Mystic, or incinerate the Mystic, but I actually decided to just play Krenko's Command, go wide, and still try to find a land for the Electrolyze. And my opponent plays Sakura Tribuilder and attacks with Serac, and I'm just going to take it. And I draw a land here, so now I can Electrolyze the Elvish Mystic and my opponent. And I figure that my opponent doesn't really want to trade Sakura Tribuilder for Young Pyromancer while stuck on 3 lands after letting the Elvish Mystic die. So I attack, and my opponent, as expected, sacrifices the Sakura Tribuilder and then leaves Serac back on defense. And now I have 5 creatures to my opponent's 5 permanents and opposition, which means that if my opponent can't kill the opposition, the game is just over. Especially since my hand is such that I can continue developing my number of creatures. And my opponent has not demonstrated the ability to answer opposition, so I tap all their permanents. And then I fail at the Moto interface here and attempt to flashback Krenko's Command, but click through the part where I have to actually cast it. And so I don't get those 2 goblins and an elemental, but I still have enough permanents or enough creatures to tap all of my opponent's permanents, and plenty more creatures on the way. Play Muldrifter and Grimlavamancer, attack my opponent down to 8, tap all their permanents, and then I have lethal attack force the following turn. For the second game, I'm on the draw again, and I have another pretty good hand. So keep, lead with Sheldock Isle, hit opposition, which is great with my hand, and I have probe and Izzet Charm to try to turn it on faster. So now I'm going to pay life to probe and just see what's up. My opponent has Disfigure, so I need to pay attention to that with my Rabblemaster. Genesis Wave, I can hold my Izzet Charm for that. Guiltleaf Winnower, I guess I need to be aware that that can kill my Bedlam Reveler, and some lands. So not a great hand. And I'm just going to play Temple of Epiphany, scry Chandra to the top. And now I'm just going to pass rather than letting my opponent disfigure my Rabblemaster. And then play Chandra, which my opponent doesn't have an answer to as far as I know. And then the presence of my Chandra encourages my opponent to play Guiltleaf Winnower to threaten the Planeswalker. But I can just Electrolyze and plus Chandra to kill the Winnower. And I'm just going to ponder here and play Grimlavamancer, keeping Island on top, which seemed fine. I have plenty of spells to play. I can know that I'm going to zero Chandra into an island and get a creature on the board here. And I'm just trying to get down to the point where I can get opposition down, and this gets another creature into play to use with the opposition. So, not a great ponder, but it seemed good enough. Here my opponent's going to develop a fairly impressive board with Silverheart and then reanimate to get a couple 8-power creatures, which I do not have a good way to answer other than opposition. So after zeroing Chandra, I could Izzet Charm and use Sheldock Isle to play opposition here, but I think that it's better to just get creatures into play first and then pass with the Izzet Charm up. My opponent sends both creatures at Chandra. I think about jumping both, but then Moto reminds me that I can't because Winnower has Menace, so I decided to just let them kill Chandra, which might have been the best play anyway. And then my opponent is going to play Sylvan Advocate and disfigure my Whirler. And now I'm just going to cycle my Izzet Charm to turn on Sheldock Isle. And now I can play opposition and Goblin Rabblemaster, which will make a goblin, and I'll use the goblin to opposition rather than running the goblin into the Sylvan Advocate. And then pass here, and I know that my opponent's only card is Genesis Wave, so I don't want to let them cast that for a lot, so I'm definitely going to tap the Cradle and the 8-power creatures, and then I decide that it's fine to take a hit for 4 to make it so that my opponent either can't cast the Genesis Wave or can only cast it for 3 if they draw a land. And my opponent fires off the Genesis Wave for 3 to try to do something about the impending lockout, and hits Forest, Ulamog, Eldritch Evolution, which is to say just a forest. And now I have Mountain, so I can play Pyromancer and Dark Dwellers, and Dark Dwellers Electrolyze to make an Elemental, and then Goblin Rabblemaster was going to make another Goblin for me, and my opponent was thoroughly locked out with opposition again, so 2 convincing wins for opposition. So that was the draft. Overall, I think my deck was pretty good. I think that playing Thing in the Ice was probably a mistake. I'm less of a blue-red spell control deck and more of a blue-red aggro deck, basically, and I should have just had a more immediately threatening creature that can get my opponent's life lower or an extra burn spell instead. And I think that trying to minimize blue rather than just having basically even colors and sometimes having colored mana issues, maybe playing better spells, might have been wrong, although I didn't go too far in that direction. I still played my Whirler Rogue in my opposition. I guess I'm saying I think that doing that was right. And maybe I should have also played Legacy of Allure, I'm not sure. It would have been better than Thing in the Ice, but I think that just a 2-1 might have been better than that. Overall, I think that this is a strategy that I used a lot in the Vintage Cube that I think ports over fairly directly. The counter spells are still good here. There are fewer combo decks, but a lot more clunky mid-range spells where you'll definitely get value out of countering them, and you can just be ahead on board with the little red attackers, burn out your opponent's early plays, counter their big stuff, and then have burn to finish them off if they try to go bigger than that, as we saw in the first game when my opponent started sticking Primeval Titan and Omnath, and I was able to just use my burn spells to finish them off. So, felt like this was a pretty safe direction to draft. there were a lot of cards that would have fit well into my deck that I didn't take because there was something else in the pack. So even if some of those cards had been getting taken, or I got a little less lucky with the packs, the deck would still be there. It's really, really flexible in terms of which blue and red cards it can use, since you're basically just using whatever. You just want a low curve of high card quality spells, and given that you want burn, creatures, card draw, counter spells, you're basically into every card blue and red has to offer, except for like wildfire and upheaval type cards, I guess. So yeah, that's it for my first foray into the Legacy Cube.